Health system investment arms. How do these work?
And thank you everybody here on the panel. So you have to correct me when I'm wrong on this, and that's the beauty of having this particular panel. I think last year we had a lot of health system venture arms that were actually quite similar in nature. But what I'm excited about this year is there's almost a feeling of uniqueness amongst you all. And I've talked to all of you individually. So Sean, you mentioned, when we think of a hospital system or a health system venture arm, sometimes they could act like a big corporate strategic where they're investing off their own balance sheet, and we'll get into that later on. But from the panel, you're unique in that aspect. You actually have health system venture arms as LPs investing into a fund. So we're going to get into demystifying what a health system venture arm truly does from a singular balance sheet perspective. But is it true that you and Ascension Ventures act more like a traditional institutional venture fund rather than a health system venture fund directly?
Yeah, we like to think that we're best of both worlds. We came from the captive venture arm side, which is in 2002, Ascension Health created what might be the first strategic investment fund at the time. And over the years, I think other health systems have seen the model done and said, we like what you're doing. Maybe we'll try to do one of our own, but let's try before you buy and join as an LP in yours. So by Fund 2 in 2007, multiple LPs joined. These were usually Catholic like-minded nonprofit health systems, but that's now evolved as well. I think that it's really trade-offs, right? So on the captive health system side, and I'll defer to my esteemed colleagues here on that, you have probably a faster decision-making process because you have a single LP that can decide, and then you have a direct connection to the strategic side, which I think a lot of the folks here can get into. For us, we have a financial mindset as well. So when we underwrite deals, we still really have to hit that 3 to 5 year return at the 3 to 5x. So our funds have performed over the years at that 20-40% IRR, which is really the bottom of the top quartile, and that's part of the fun. The other is we do have to talk to our constituent health systems. And oftentimes that really, I think, moves the needle when we invest in a company, and usually it's a signal of the U.S. health system where they're moving. So we could bring those companies back in as the innovation arms. And I think a lot of the different health systems see venture arms, us included, in different ways. So sometimes it's a innovation search function, which we're happy to fulfill. Sometimes it's just returning $2 for every dollar that you put in a few years later. And so I think the vehicle fulfills both, but I think there are trade-offs when we're probably a little bit slower because we have to appeal to, I think, 13 systems instead of 1. And but I think it's also a cyclical thing over the years, depending on how the financial health of systems are, where the strength of any type of fund is.
Thank you. Thank you for that. And Liridon, I want to toss it over to you. I don't want to say you're more of like the purest form of a health system venture arm, but I do want you to go back into the history of, and I remember when the press release came out of OSF Ventures releasing the announcement of their fund, but also the fact that you guys had a major awesome exit this year fairly recently. So talk about like how a hospital system wants to establish a venture arm, what the purpose is of that venture arm back towards the hospital system, and then use an example of like how you ended up being one of the first investors into Endotronics that recently exited.
Yeah, thanks, Giovanni. So OSF Ventures was established in 2016. The thought behind establishing OSF Ventures in tandem with our OSF Innovation Arm was to kind of change the mindset of our mission partners, which is the name that we give to our employees, as well as kind of promote new technologies into the system. It took a while, but I think we've gotten there in terms of just mindset and willingness to work with startups, try new opportunities, try new technologies from an OSF perspective in our OSF ecosystem. That first fund, we were just trying to figure out what we were doing in terms of getting our name out there, getting our brand out there, letting people know kind of who we are. We're in Central Illinois, so people don't necessarily think of a Midwest kind of health system being as forward-thinking and innovative as we are. And as a part of that, our first investment, our first fund was a company called Innotronics, which is an implantable kind of CHF-focused device to measure pulmonary artery pressure, fast follower to CardioMEMS, an OSF doctor. Actually started the company in Peoria. So it was a great kind of story for Peoria and the innovation kind of landscape there. It took a while and had to kind of go through clinical trials and PMA pathway and FDA approval, but we were very excited. It got Innotronics was acquired by Edwards in July. Huge win for the Peoria ecosystem as well as OSF. But it took a little bit of time. Had to be patient with that. But the impact on patient lives is very meaningful, particularly that chronic heart failure population. But since 2016, we've had three funds. The latest one that Giovanni mentioned that we announced was at the end of 2022, which is 100. And we focus on Series A, Series B investments across medical devices, digital health, tech-enabled services, diagnostics, no pharma, no biotech. Our initial check size is called $3 million. We do look for that board observer role or voting board seat as part of every investment because we do look to be that strategic partner. Back to kind of Sean's point about strategic and kind of financial. We're kind of straddling both as well in terms of if I don't get that strategic buy-in from my health system subject matter advisors, doctors, nurses, therapists, operational leaders, I can't invest. Even if I know that it will probably end up being a nice financial return. So it kind of meeting both aspects is very important for us.
If I can add, so I think you started off the question with what are our differences, but honestly what's more stark for this group, especially as we continue to get to know each other well, is our similarities. And at the end of the day, we all represent health system entities. And what that means is we represent a really, really, really rich asset base of clinicians, operators, and it allows us to pressure test deals and opportunities in a very, very different way. And so even thinking about the differences, at the end of the day, the health system venture capital network is a super tight-knit community. And we love co-investing together because we recognize that we represent the ability to de-risk an investment opportunity by getting multiple market-based proof points. And it's really hard to do that elsewhere. It's really hard to understand how do you operate you bring this device or technology into the workflow of a day-to-day of a clinician. How do you understand the reimbursement pathways? Like that's what we're super, super close to. And at the end of the day, if we get to invest and co-invest together, we end up being able to de-risk that in our own investment strategy. And so the differences are absolutely there, just given the size and scope of this group. But I think the similarities are what actually excites me more about the health system CVC community.
Yeah, I want to make sure that I'm not solving just a problem for the Cleveland Clinic. So, I mean, all of our systems are slightly nuanced. We're extremely high acuity, so our main campus, I think, is the highest acuity mix of patients in the entire country. So some of the nuanced problems we're solving, if we're bringing a solution in, is not going to be something that is basically market-based and going to solve the same problems for you all. So I think we love working together, and I think we've tried more and more to do that.
By the way, before we continue, and the light is so bright, make noise, clap hands something if you actually knew that health system venture arms existed. Good. Now we're about to get deeper. So I want to talk, Todd, you're unique within yourself because I remember talking to J.D. Friedland about this concept of inward out and outward in, and you represent Cleveland Clinic. Talk about that because there are nuances, and I want to make sure everyone knows that health system venture arms act in different ways. There's a lot of similarities, which is the reason why this whole panel exists, and we want to make sure that everyone is aware of that, which it sounds like we're doing a pretty good job of it. But at the same time, I don't want you guys to be bombarded with a bunch of startup companies coming up to you that aren't necessarily relevant, and even more so, it's our job to educate them on how to approach you best so that everyone's time is best used. So Talk to us about Cleveland Clinic Innovations, Cleveland Clinic Ventures, and what you guys best do with not only supporting innovation, but also building innovation.
Yeah, so our platform has a couple different strategies. So we're part of, my team's about 9 investors, but we're part of a 70-person innovations team. So we have about a $450 million research budget. We have 80,000 caregivers across the organization, all of them innovating. Many of them, that's why they came to the Cleveland Clinic. So significant amount of new IP innovation coming through the Cleveland Clinic every year. Our innovations team broadly is responsible for trying to take those innovations from ideation through to partnering with external parties to, frankly, improve care and get those solutions to patients. So part of our job on the innovation side is the traditional, let's find a partner, let's build together and get this into patients' hands. For a select few technologies every year, I'd say 1 to 3, we're starting companies. So you can almost think of us as an accelerator. We have about 25 portfolio companies today, 27 portfolio companies today. I'd say about 3/4 of those we started. So half of that's device. Most of those were innovations from one of our clinicians that was solving a problem that they didn't see addressed in the market. So we invest early stage, so first capital in. I played the role of CEO for one of our companies, which is not a great sign sometimes. We try to bring in kind of gifted management as quickly as we can, and then bring in external investors to help us sort of optimize the opportunity for those platforms. So historically, that's been a big piece, and we'll invest along the life cycle for those companies. The other piece is we're also the eyes and ears out in the market. So we have amazing innovation at the clinic, but we're solving a fraction of the problems that are out there, and there's amazing innovation outside the walls of the clinic. So in the last 18 months, I've seen about 1,500 companies, my team has, and we've connected about 200 of those companies into the organization, solving clinical problems, operational problems, and to the extent that we can make that match, build a strong clinical tie, ideally we're building something together, generating new IP, there's an opportunity for us to invest as well. So in the last 6 months, we've announced kind of 4 investments, and they're all external. They're companies that we identified a pretty significant need at the clinic, proactively went out and looked for a universe of partners that could help us solve that problem, picked a partner, and we're kind of working together to really build a solution to solve not just our issues at the clinic, but again, something that hopefully is dynamic enough to solve the problems for the providers outside as well. So to your answer, how can we interact with folks here today? It's sort of what I've been doing for the last 2 days, which has been fun. My best thing that I can do in my seat here is get you to somebody way more interesting than me at the Cleveland Clinic as a starting point. So making the match to a clinician at the clinic, and then the collaboration begins from there, and that's our path to invest. So it does take some patience. Providers are an interesting animal. Each of us are a snowflake in terms of navigating, but I'd say we can be the front door to help you connect into the organization. So.
Thank you. And Stefan, I want to toss it over to you. Very few people likely have not heard of Mayo Clinic, and you represent Mayo Clinic Innovations and Ventures. Even from feedback from a countless amount of startups that I've been hearing who have either reached out or had communications with Mayo Clinic, and even you specifically, there's this notion of co-development versus like this classic, you're an investor, you're going to write a check, and that's what they need to go spend it and build their company. Just so we can help everyone in the audience understand the difference of you writing a check for Mayo Clinic Ventures and just saying, hey, here you go, I'm an investor, versus co-development. What are the differences there?
Yeah, I'll talk about the similarities before I talk about the differences, and I think John really laid the foundation for us to have that conversation. So much of what Todd's program does within Cleveland Clinic mirrors a lot of the similar goals and objectives that our team has. So from a Mayo Clinic venture perspective, I like to think of us maybe less so as a traditional VC and more like a venture partner. We have the ability to deploy capital, but our first and foremost goals for the institution are twofold. The first is to help bring new technology to the patient to inform and improve patient care. And the second is to generate revenue for Mayo Clinic. And so we're always very transparent about what that means. What that results in from an operational perspective is when we were evaluating opportunities with startups, with other companies, whether they be outside of Mayo or whether we're looking to spin technology out, new venture formation, collaborations, we're looking at where we can be providing value beyond the capital. We're not a traditional VC. In fact, the typical multiple on ROI is not our front and center value metric for performance. Our goal is to fundamentally continue to maintain the revenue that's generated at the institution and operate as a diversified revenue stream for Mayo Clinic. And that brings a pretty different perspective. So when I'm talking to a startup, I'm often talking to them not only about what kind of capital we can bring to bear at what stage they're at, because we have mechanisms from very early stage to mid and to late, ranging from a couple $100K to a couple million and beyond, depending on where the company is at and what their needs are. But what we're looking for, again, is that opportunity to bring value more so than the capital. And that, again, manifests as, like Giovanni said, where we look for these collaborative or co-development opportunities. For us, what that means, and you can kind of tell from my title, I'm both the technology and business development manager. We marry our tech transfer function and our business development function within Mayo Clinic. So I sit intimately with the IP generators and the clinical innovators within the institution so that I can have a really good appreciation of where their interests, championship, and passions are, and map those to the needs and the goals of a startup when I'm talking to you out in the field, where we can find these collaborative opportunities that we're helping to drive product development, drive value generation, and then we can infuse capital to pour gasoline on that fire of innovation. These are the perfect opportunities for us to be partners and to really push something forward into the clinic. So we look at co-development from the perspective of where can we bring more than just money.
Just so I'm aware, do all of you co-develop? Sign a hand, show of hands, co-develop?
So yes, for us, but it's not our function as Rex Health Ventures. So we are kind of on the opposite side of the house where we are directly focused on outside-in investment, and we are built a lot more like a venture capital firm. Within the UNC ecosystem at large, again, we're academic medical center, and so there's a lot of rich innovation coming out of the university. It's not the mandate for us as a fund. But otherwise, I think all of us in one way, shape, or form.
I think that's kind of an important point to say too, so that you can kind of think of these funds as a sliding scale between purely strategic and purely financial. You guys are LP-based. You're much more skewed towards the purely financial piece. You guys are probably closer on that side. I think we're probably in the middle. I'd say we're heavily strategic, but we're not going to be doing this very long if we're also not delivering returns. So there's a piece of that too. But it does, as you start to interact with these different groups, your hurdle potentially and timing and your approach to unlocking capital or collaboration may take a little bit more time. So for us, it starts with a clinical relationship, and it means that it's going to be a much deeper relationship when we deploy capital. Whereas I think you guys are much more, there is the strategic angle, but it's much more capital-based. You can probably move a little bit more quickly, I'll acknowledge than we can, and you're probably in that boat too. But it does, when you think about how do you interact with our groups, I think it's important to understand that dynamic as you start the relationship. Speed is something I've had to redefine in my seat here, so.
Well, and that's one thing I wanted to maybe extra emphasize. And you said, timeliness for us is probably a little bit more expedited, and it kind of chuckled a little bit because speed to act is always challenging in our world. And actually, I think there was an interesting panel yesterday. I don't remember what the question was, but it was talking about the nuances of Medtronic and how to navigate the waters of J&J and something along those. You have 40 decision makers that you need to work through. Just to be clear, that's very similar to our structure. I mean, each health system entity that we represent are these big behemoth cruise ships. And so it does take time, and you need to be patient in working with a hospital system. But what you get on the flip side is what we talked about before, that rich market proof point, because you have a rock star clinical individual, rock star operator that has conviction around the opportunity. But yeah, definitely still slow on this end, even without the multiple LP base, but just super interesting.
And so from OSF perspective, our focus as a venture arm, similar to Rex Health, is outside in, but we do have co-development opportunities that we work through our OSF innovation side. From the perspective, in terms of, we talk to our subject matter advisors, but we always talk to all of these other kind of panelists here, and we love to co-invest with each other. So I get a lot of questions in terms of, are you competitive with other health system kind of investors? No. And so the more the merrier on the cap table, from my perspective, because that just resonates in terms of, yes, it's a pain point, yes, it's a resonating solution, and we can partner with each other on it.
And would say if I see OSF on a pitch deck, the first call that I make is to lead out. So we're definitely sharing kind of back and forth, and the depth of your relationship is also a sliding scale, I'd say, with providers. So we do check.
With regards to the big cruise ship that John just mentioned, that's not you, right?
Yeah, I think that, first of all, the logos are very validating. So if I see a pitch deck with some of my colleagues here, I think it really, calls a lot of attention to the quality of the company. We're probably an armada, if you want to keep, going with the ship analogies here. So it's harder a little bit to steer, so it's like 5 cruise ships, I guess. What I was going to say is, if you look at sort of the purpose of health system investing, not to get too philosophical, I think it's because, doctors at the end of the day want innovation in some way. I think it's a talent acquisition and retainment tool. If you had a hospital that never innovated and, you had sort of blood pressure cuffs and that was it, forever, you'd lose all the talent. They go somewhere else like Mayo or Cleveland Clinic. And so, to react to that and address that need, there's innovation functions. Essentia Ventures tend to represent LPs, not all of them, I will say, Intermountain being one, OSF another one, that focus on care delivery. And sometimes these LPs, probably like Ascension, don't have significant innovation functions. And so the way that they look to venture arms as well as folks like us is to act as that innovation function and searchlight as well. And so we would oftentimes, to Todd's point, we see thousands of companies a year. And so when there's a need from a service line to say, look for, let's say, a additional competitor in the heart pump field, they look to us to provide the best intel, jet skis in front of these great tanker oil tankers to search the right areas. Yeah, so the jet skis. And so we're nimble, we can sort of see where, through the fog, where the market's going, and then bring that innovation back in an organic way to the health systems. And so I think we fulfilled that innovation side directly or indirectly. And that's really, part of the purpose of a fund like ours, as well as some of my colleagues here. So hopefully that clarifies, where, that drive of innovation comes from. And I think, maybe pandering to the audience where, a lot of the international health systems are starting to copy this. I mean, the other day I got a call from the Danish consulate to say, we got a lot of health systems, but they've never really thought about venture investing. What's that all about? And I think that, balance sheets are balance sheets. And if you can leverage that and get free innovation and then get that $2 back for every dollar you put out, it's a great model, right? You're creating value in a way that, you really, can't really imagine directly, or it's counterintuitive in a way, so.
Thank you for that. And John, I want to throw a question over to you, because you and I talked about this earlier. I think Lyridan's example of Endotronics is a great example, because we're at MedTech Malta right now. So when we think of MedTech, medical device, hardcore class 3 heart failure implant that just went through an exit and you invested in, we talked about there's a lot of health IT, there's a lot of digital health, not necessarily steering away from hard tech, meaning MedTech. But talk about some of the innovation that you like to particularly look at that may not necessarily be that class 2 de novo implantable hardcore medical device, and why does it fit into that model?
Yeah, absolutely, and I think it's so interesting here because those two classes have been merging consistently and even trying to differentiate. There's physical devices that have incredible software components. There's software devices that now have physical components. So it's fun to be in the intersection of kind of the two and seeing how that has been playing out. So at UNC and at Rex Health Ventures specifically, we're about a $2 to $3 million check in Series A, B size or shape, and so. But within that, we invest in 3 different domains. So as you mentioned, we'll do some drug discovery, some therapeutics, a lot of MedTech, and a lot of digital health IT. And most of my background, actually, I was a biomedical engineer as the start of my career, kind of pushed that aside for a while, leaned into digital health, health IT, and then have now circled back into MedTech, and being able to see the overlap between the two has just been really, really interesting. And so what I'd say is, one, we invest in things for a very particular reason, right? It adds strategic value to our organization. And the strategic value that you glean from a MedTech company versus a digital health, health IT company is different. The decision-making process is different. And so what I'd, at least just kind of seeing these worlds collide, in the MedTech world, and again, it's funny, we talked about timing, it still takes a long time, but your decision-making process tends to be a little easier, right? If it's your cardiology company and you have your head of cardiology that is bought into a device, that is an easier path towards an investment for us because we have that rich clinical feedback. Now, if you look at a prior authorization company that touches the rev cycle, but you need the COO, the CEO, the CFO, and you have this kind of really challenging to navigate the waters of decision-making process over here, and yet, right, you have some really interesting operational value, because if you improve prior authorizations across your board, that's a 2-3% margin lift across your organization. Versus here, right, you're improving patient care in a very different way for those cardiology patients. So you get a ton of different value in the different segments that you invest. And I think for us, just super grateful and lucky that we have so folks on the operating side to be able to talk through some of those operational-based plays, on the MedTech side to be able to, and the clinical side to be able to go very, very deep down the rabbit hole with neurology, et cetera. But then the return profiles are very, very different too. So now you start to talk very binary outcomes here. It's very hard to move past a challenging primary endpoint that doesn't go as really well. In the digital healthcare space, if you have $2 million in revenue, and we've seen a lot of this play out in a lot of our portfolio companies, use cases now kind of losing wind, you can pivot very quickly. And so the outcomes are a little bit less binary in that world. And so a little bit, I kind of went on a little bit of a rant there, but kind of the stark differences between the two spaces. And it's funny, those you kind of hear it, the investors that are really into MedTech are like, how the heck are you playing in the digital healthcare, health IT space? Like LLM, AI, wazoo, like I don't know how to understand the differentiation between them. And then you see that the more focused on the digital health, health IT is how do you get through regulation? How do you get through the FDA process? And so luckily we get to kind of play in the middle, and it's been a very fun space.
Thank you for that. And because I genuinely don't know, and like an LP-based fund like you, Sean, with Ascension, raise your hand. Do you guys lead rounds? You can lead? Prefer to syndicate as a non-lead, though? Is that fair to say? Or do you like to lead?
So we're about half and half. If you looked at the history of 90 investments, it's like 45 lead, 45 not. It really depends on the deal situation and the depth of knowledge of the individual partner. So for me, I love heart failure, cardiology is where I came from. It's where my PhD was. That part I'm very comfortable leading, but if it was sepsis, where I have no idea, I'll defer to, more experienced colleagues in that area and follow as part of the syndicate. So it really depends on the situation for us.
One thing that is a clear differentiator across the group is we do not lead. We will rarely ever, and nor do we have the capabilities in-house to do valuation, to set a Series A price. We don't do it. The only times where we kind of cross that bridge is in the position of a new co-formation, but we're looking at our partners across the table when we're generating and setting up a new venture. Even if we are first money in, we're not leading that first money in.
We will lead, but we'd much rather prefer to kind of join a syndicate. And I think I've talked to you guys, like I like to invest where people don't need our money, which usually means, again, it starts with that kind of deep relationship, and it's more than our capital that we're bringing to the story. That's kind of our focus.
Same with us. Typically part of syndicate, but we have led, but it's a little more atypical for us. We're in Malta, so we do invest globally. We have investments out of Israel, out of Ireland, out of Scotland. It happens to coincide that typically when we came in, the lead investor did require kind of an entity flip. So it ended up being the case that they were U.S. domiciled once we came in, but we do look globally.
Yeah, I'd say we're probably in the same camp. We have the ability to, but would need to be super strategic for us in nature. And I think more importantly, a huge aspect of our diligence process is being able to pull in the right syndicate to be able to fill out that. And if that's co-lead, if that's lead, or if that's fill out the remainder of the round, we'll play the shape that needs to happen in order for us to get the most and powerful raise that can happen. And we talked a little bit about just us as health systems, and when you hear strategics, you think of Medtronic, J&J, Intuitive, but there's a lot of different strategic corporate venture capital groups. And I think you're seeing that in the market. You're seeing the market lean into corporate venture capital in a really interesting way. Actually, Sean, you and I were talking about this a little bit ago. There was a recent SVB report on CVC interactions over time. It was super interesting. Basically, they've been tracking, how many investments over the course of the past 10 to 20 years have included CVC investing. And if you look 10, 15 years ago, 5, 10% of deals had CVC investing. Now we're closer to 25, a third of all deals have corporate venture capital investing. But what was super interesting, highly recommend going and take a look at the report. They looked at all the outcomes of the companies that had included CVC investing. And the punchline is more exits, right? Less failures, and you're more likely to go from A to B to B to C to C to D when you have a corporate venture capital investor on the table. That doesn't mean you have to have all corporate venture capital individuals on the table. It's not an or strategy. It's very much an and. And so when we talk about syndicate, it's not only the health systems. We look at institutional investors. We want to make sure everything that we can pull together is going to be the best group that's going to get that company to success.
And I want to throw this back to Sean. We'll go back down the list again, just to educate the audience on understanding where you guys come in. Another piece of feedback that I've received is, I would think naturally, and I've been proven wrong, that sometimes hospital health systems that push access to a clinician champion, for example, or access to clinicians, which is a value add, would come in ridiculously early. But sometimes there's actually, you guys are coming, I would say mid, I don't want to say late stage, but you actually go a little bit later than I initially expected. Is that the truth? And where do you guys actually invest in, and what have you seen? I should say, what is your typical check size? And I know it ranges.
Yeah. So I think the party line for us is the initial check size is 5 to 15 million. But if you look at lately, the median has been 8 to 12. And we like to stay agile, so I don't want to put a definition on the stage of investing, because I think for a multi-LP fund, we're always reactive to the rest of the portfolio. So have we taken on enough risk for the return, and how have they performed, and where do we need to place more chips on the table to get that return, so that they mix up into a 20-40% IRRs, right? So we could go early or late. I've said sort of late stage before, and then everybody it starts pitching to me late stage, and I make an early stage investment, so I contradict myself. It's just never good. But it is very much state of the market, state of our fund, and then where we have appetite to take risk. So the mix of those things really, I think, help. Maybe just back to the point around corporate venture capital. So I came from Phillips Ventures, which is the strategic MedTech side. I think, especially for MedTech, it makes perfect sense, right? Because the acquirers and the exits are where some of the big MedTechs are, and if you can have them on the cap table, it significantly de-risks that. Not naming any specific ones, but the hit rates for those are like 1/3 of the investments from the CVCs get acquired by the mothership. The other maybe notable is having health systems logos on the cap table not only de-risks you in a clinical way, because you have access to the clinical perspectives that may not always be the sugary ones that your advisors are providing you, since they're also on the cap table. We're a little bit more frank and objective in that feedback. We've seen instances in the past where a few of our companies have exited and gone public, Wall Street sees these logos as a de-risking factor. You can't really measure how much of the share price bump you get, but you do see the analysts know, Accenture Ventures is on the cap table, so it must be a strong signal that clinical adoption is the case, and I'm sure with my colleagues it's the same thing.
Mayo Clinic is a big, confusing organization. So I'm going to try to break this down into 3 answers with 3 pieces each. But the most important takeaway is to say that my team, the team from Mayo Clinic Ventures that have that title that look like Technology and Business Development Manager, are here to help navigate the chaos that is our organization. So 3 answers, 3 pieces of information each. Mayo Clinic Ventures sits on the side of innovation and IP from an investment perspective. We also have a corporate venture fund that has the ability to deploy capital from a strategic perspective. So we work together on both of those sides with the ability to deploy capital from each of our sets of pots of money, but the ingestion and the time and the place for that startup to make sense for one versus the other is extremely nuanced. So you come to us to help try to understand and navigate what makes the most sense. Not a helpful answer, I know, but at least there's a navigator to help figure it out along the way. Second set of 3 answers. We have 3 functional ways of deploying capital. We have an early stage fund that usually invests in a couple $100K. We have a mid-stage fund, typically where we're reinvesting in companies in our portfolio. That's about half to about 2.5. And then we have our true growth stage fund managed by Treasury that invests 10 plus. On the CVC side, they invest between about 1 and 10 million, depending on the stage, depending on the strategic priority. Last third piece answer. Our on-ramp, the best time to engage with us is one of these 3 locations. The first is where we're generating or starting a new venture around IP coming out of Mayo, or jointly with Mayo and a syndicate of groups who are putting together a new venture. The second is a company who is early stage, looking to collaborate to drive product development of their primary product or another product in their roadmap. And then the third is a company that's making progress with their primary product. Maybe they're at the Series A or Series B stage where they're looking at pivoting their platform technology to a new indication, and we can bring together assets from the institution and or clinical expertise and collaborators from the institution to support every part of the innovation process, from backup napkin brainstorm drawings, preclinical testing, and first-in-human testing. So we play in all those spaces, and we do this at all of our hospitals across the US.
Quite confusing, but I'd say everywhere from that company formation through to, we just did a Series E, so we sort of invest across the capital stack. Again, anywhere from kind of $1 to $10 million, depending on the opportunity. Similar to you, and I'll go quick because I think we're short on time here, but when we're investing externally, it's really a focus on what assets we're bringing to the table. So it's not just going to be our capital. In fact, that's like the final piece of the story. Is it data? Is it clinical insight? Is it some IP? Is it something, are we building together? Those are the assets that make it possible for us to invest externally. So.
From an OSF perspective, what we look for is that first in human data to have kind of been collected and kind of see initial results from that perspective. Anything earlier is tough for us if it's just kind of animal or the like. In terms of as you're thinking about approaching any one of us, our portfolios are online. We do absolutely think about portfolio construction as we look to make our investments, right? We can only make so many kind of super early stage deals. We can only make so many neuro deals, cardio deals alike. So definitely always have a look at our portfolio, because portfolio construction is kind of in the back of our mind as we kind of continue to deploy our fund. Initial check size, I mentioned, is kind of $3 million, and we do look for that board observer or voting board seat for every investment.
Yeah, so we're probably mostly aligned with OSF in our strategy, but just given our time, the way I describe it is more guidelines versus guardrails, right? We say Series A and B. I think everyone here probably knows the letters don't mean much anymore. It's really hard to navigate, exactly the defined parameters. But we don't want to be probably the first logo on the slide. We probably also don't want to be the 20th logo. So somewhere in that sweet spot of being able to help pour some gasoline on the fire. I think the final, I guess, maybe comment for this group, just because it's super relevant. I mean, this is an awesome asset base. I love working with these folks. If you have health systems that are customers, you'd be surprised. Many of them probably have venture funds in one way, shape, or form. And it's the first question I ask when I meet one of you all, and it should be the first questions you all are asking. So if you're not tapping into the health system corporate venture group strategy, you should be, or you should be trying to. It's a really awesome group.
So we started about talking about, are there a lot of similarities, is there more similarities, or is there more differences? But give a round of applause if you learned something today on these different hospital venture arms, investment arms here today. So thank you guys so much for being on this panel. Thank you for sharing your insights, and it was awesome being with you. Thank you so much.